to the library, General Council. My name is Ioana, and welcome to our library today. Before we begin, we just have some quick housekeeping. So the toilets are on the back of the library. In case of emergency, please follow the staff instructions. But anyhow, the closest emergency will be the way you came through. Also, please, if you have mobile phones, turn off unless you are just waiting for an emergency phone call. And at the end of the presentation, if you please fill out the evaluation forms that are on your seats. So today, we are lucky enough to have 4 family storytellers.
Oh,
Each of our guests will present a history of their family, their first family to settle in Australia, with one having an intriguing family connection that spans 160 years. Please put your hands together for those presenting first families and connections. Now Lionel to introduce the presenters, so I hope you will enjoy.
Thanks very much for coming along today. It's really good to see you. Fantastic turnout. We just got four short stories on people's first families to come to Australia. First up, we'll have Roger. Roger's doing a John Martin, and John Martin was a first fleeter. And as it turns out, if you're just interested, myself and Roger's wife are related on the first fleet through connections. So it's John, fourth cousins. So it's through John Martin that we've actually found each other in Perth. So it's really good. Anyway, so first up we'll have Roger.
Right.
Go.
Yes, you'll do. That's right. Oh, I need that.
Yep.
Yeah, I need this. Is that all right? This volume? Yeah. Right. Right, I don't know how many of you were here last year, but last year we did.
That's right.
It's okay.
No, you can't change it. Just don't touch the screen.
Don't touch the screen, oh dear. All right.
Go for it.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, last year we did John Randall, and so we're doing John Martin. And as we see here, he was the husband of the third aunt of my wife, Veronica, and he was a first fleeter. So, as I say, last year we did John Randall. He was here, and so he went through. Sorry about that. Went through there. That's where I am. But this time we're doing John Martin, who was the husband of her sister. So, in other words, an aunt. Right. Who was John Martin? We don't really know where he started from. Jamaica. There's a John Martin there in 1754, whether it was ours or not. There's also one that was baptised in Barbados. We don't know. Apparently, he was literate. He was convicted of stealing in London and transported to Australia. And he was a farmer, had 2 wives and 11 children, and then he died in Parramatta. So that's an overview. As I say, we don't know how he was born, obviously, somewhere here in the West Indies and got to the UK. What went on between, we don't know. Did he go to America and fight with the British with the War of Independence for America? Or was he a seaman and went to the UK? Or did he stow away? We don't know. What we do know is that he was convicted in the assizes, in the courts in Middlesex, and he was apparently was caught stealing 2 cloth coats, waistcoat and a few other things at a value of 39 shillings, property of Mr. Turnbull. Found guilty. It's not going staggered, is it? No. The early fortunes of him, that he actually stole goods to the value of 69 shillings, but there was a cut-off for capital punishment at 40 shillings. So the jury was very benevolent and they said, oh, hold on, we'll convict him for 39 shillings. And then he won't get capital punishment, but just 7 years transportation. Originally he was going to go to West Africa and was put on that ship. That, if you know your history, that was a pretty bad solution to the convict problem. They had so many convicts that they had to get them out of the UK. They went down the West African coast and they just put them ashore. Particularly for him, he was an African. They put him ashore, Africa, yeah, he'll be right. And about 90% of the people who were transported died on that expedition. So he had the good fortune of being put on a hulk in the Thames. You can imagine being in the Thames and the cold and the wet and working during the day and then going back to a squalid hulk. And eventually he was put on the Alexander and came out to Australia. He didn't come on the Ruby Princess or anything like that. Well, that's just going out to one of these West African countries. No, he didn't come on the Ruby Princess, he came on the Alexander. And the Alexander, as it says here, 34 meters long. I would think that that's, I don't know, about this 34 meters, not much.
Yes.
And 9 meters wide, which is only from here to there.
How many?
And there they had 213 male convicts, 37 Marines to look after them, and a crew of 30. Can you imagine, for 160 days? Not much fun. Last time we saw the route, they left from Plymouth, Canary Islands, Rio, following the winds to Cape Town, and then through to Botany Bay. It wasn't all hunky-dory when he got here, because he had to work because the government were feeding him. And as you know, we're in August now, it's pretty cold, has been for the last few days. He inadvertently lit a fire in his hut, which wasn't allowed, so he got 25 lashes. Can you imagine? We saw that he was convicted in Middlesex in July 1782. He should have been freed 7 years later, but they didn't have the papers.
Oh, no.
So the papers were meant to come out on the second fleet. Unfortunately, they didn't, so he was still a prisoner. Eventually, they did come out on the third fleet. However, it took them from April through to from July through to April to do the paperwork, and then eventually was freed. So he did 9 years as a convict. When they were freed, they were given a parcel of land, and it's 2 pigs or 2 cows or a horse or some sort of livestock, whatever was going. They were given 50 acres, and then an axe, a shovel, and 2 spades. Why 2 spades, I don't know. Maybe he had a wife. And these 50 acres were, I don't know if you know Sydney, Carlingford. There's Sydney down here, Sydney down here, and Parramatta up there, so it's about halfway in between.
Near the river.
That's a close-up of all the plots from the original map. It's amazing, the colours. Well, as we know, he was freed, and then he's married Anne Toy. Who was she? She was born about 1752, I think in Norwich, in the east of England, and she was convicted, of course, this time for pawning a violin. She was sentenced for 7 years. She arrived in Sydney on the Second Fleet, on the Neptune, and then she married John Martin, but she died a few years later. Why it says Hell Ship, that is somewhat ignominious as well. The Hell Ship, they embarked with 400 men and women, 160 days, but about a third of the men died, and similarly for the women. Unlike the First Fleet, Captain Phillips wanted everybody to arrive and get the colony going. The Second Fleet, they paid them, they put them on the ship and paid them for the people who were on the ship, but not who was alive at the other end. So they were starved and they had to carry the people off, and yeah, it was not fun. So Martin got his, John Martin got his plot of land here, and incidentally it was just next door to John Randall, who was also a Negro. So there they got their plots of land. And by this time John Randall had his land and started his family. So John Martin had his farm, he had a wife, she died, and he was living next door to John Randall. John Randall had a daughter, Mary, whom he married in 1812. But if you look very carefully here, you'll see that she was born in 1792. She had her first child at 1802, when she was 14. She had the second one when she was 16, and a third one when she was 18 or 19. It was at that stage that she got married to John Martin. So, and it says in the records that they got married and they christened the first two children at the same time. But they lived happily ever after because they had 11 children all up, and she was still giving birth at 39. Meanwhile, he was 55 when he got married. There was a bit of a discrepancy there. Ooh. I don't know.
Just go to the next one.
I don't know, something's happened there. In the final years, John Martin made out his will in December, something or other. I don't know where this one's come from. He made his will out, and 4 days later he died. And in his will, he left a shilling to his wife, and £25 the farm was worth to the 11 children. Now, whether they were all there at that stage or not, I don't know. Mary went on to live for another 20 years, and that's her gravestone in St John's in Parramatta. John was buried in an unmarked grave. However, down here you'll see a little plaque there that the Fellowship of the First Fleeters put to for John. So that's the story of John Martin. And just recapping, he was a sister, he married the sister of Francis, and that's how we come through, and the husband of the third great aunt. Thank you.